are you doing?
Live.
Fine, thanks.
So I hear Andy is retired.
No, Glenn Gass retired. Andy perseveres.
Is he still there?
Yeah.
Well, I drive Uber these days, and students are one of the students told me that Andy retired. So
No.
this is his last semester.
Okay, well, we are.
Like I say, it might have been his colleague Glenn.
Okay, so I'm taking down my mask too. Thank you for coming, everybody, to Juniper Book Club. I'm Jenny Sweeney, the owner of Juniper Art Gallery, and Lisa Dedler here is my assistant who I couldn't live without. And I'm really excited to also be offering today, we've got Songbird Coffee over there. It's called Birds and Beans, and I've been looking for a long time for shade-grown coffee that's organic and fair trade and all that. So they send me some samples. So if you have time and inclination to drink a little bit of coffee, let me know what you think, and I might order it in for the gallery. So book club meets on the second Thursday every month, and if you have ideas for a book club author, let me know. I don't have anyone lined up for June, although I've invited someone. So if you sign up for our newsletter, then you would know who's coming out next. But it is the second Thursday every month. Also, all the artwork you see in the gallery is online at juniperartgallery.com, so you can go there. And we have several upcoming events. In May is a busy month. Hi there.
Hi.
Welcome. We've got our Fiber Arts group on the third Sunday, the 15th, and third Saturday Art and Music. We're really excited. This is our first time really going again with third Saturday music series, and Opal Fly and Peter Bailey are going to be here, and they're just so much fun. So if you can make that, it's 2 to 4 p.m. on the 21st. Hey, hi. Hello. Welcome. Come on, we've got chairs just for you.
Sit in the front row here.
I will. Yeah.
And then last but not least, for May, we have a women's writing group. It's our last circle for the spring, and then we're going to take a couple months off and start again in August. So if you have any questions, you can find it all online. And it is my pleasure to introduce my friend and amazing author and photographer, Steven Higgs. I do need my glasses. Quite see like I used to. So I'm just going to read his bio from the book. And if you'll notice the photo from his book, I took that picture. I was at the Moreland Trust. Crestwood. So Steven Higgs is one of Indiana's senior environmental writers and photographers. He's the author of Eternal Vigilance, 9 Tales of Environmental Heroism in Indiana. That's IUP 1996. And his experience includes 11 years as an environmental reporter at the Herald Times in Bloomington and 4 as senior environmental writer-editor at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. He's an adjunct lecturer at the Indiana University Media School, where he teaches introductory classes in reporting, writing, and editing, and advanced classes on online journalism. On the side, he leads nature tours through his business, Natural Bloomington Eco Tours, and more through the Sierra Club Hoosier chapter. He lives in Bloomington, Indiana. Are you still doing your eco tours at all?
No, I haven't
Not
done
anymore?
those in a few years.
Yeah, we had a great eco tour when I was the director at the Enright Center and Area 10 Agency for Aging. And Steve took a lot of seniors on, and we just had such a good time. So anyway, I want to read one more thing that is from Jim Thom's foreword. And he says, in this guidebook, Steven Higgs has compiled and written 100 times more good, useful information about my native state's natural treasures than I ever learned in the 80 years of crawling, hiking, riding, swimming, and paddling all over them. So that's a pretty good person to give you a foreword and quite the pat on the back. So turn it over to Steve, and we're just open to asking questions and anything you like or want to ask him about writing the guide. We're just going to basically have a conversation here.
I hope so, because I didn't really prepare anything.
Yeah.
I'm a little rusty. It's been probably at least 2 years since the last Northern Indiana book came out. So I'm a little out of practice here. And I do want to say, first of all, 2 of the things that I enjoyed the most about the book was sharing this space with Jamie's photograph and with Jim's foreword. As I told Jim, what an honor it is to share a book cover with James Alexander Thom, who's been one of my heroes and friends since my HT days. I actually met Jim when Panther in the Sky came out. I volunteered because he'd always been one of my heroes. He and I have a lot in common with the journalism school, with the natural into nature and all that sort of thing. And I volunteered to write a story when Panther in the Sky came out, just as an excuse really to meet him. And so I went out to his place out on Stobsville Road there, right on the Owen County line. And we ended up going down and sitting beside his barn and talking for 4 hours. He told me at the end, he says, usually I can't wait for these things to be over. And I didn't want this one to end. So, Jim and I have been really good friends and good close friends since, well, that must have been 1990, more or less. So.
Yeah, we might add, we've got some of Jim Thom's sculptures here too, in case you didn't know. He was a wood carving artist as well as an incredible writer.
So here I am sharing space with you.
Yes, you are.
Perfect.
So please just try to make this a conversation because I don't have, like I said, I don't have anything prepared. I'm just going to be kind of talking off the cuff here. I'm also really proud to have Rich Fields here. I don't know if you guys know Rich or not. He's one of the great nature photographers in the state of Indiana. I got to know Rich. He was at the DNR and I was working at IDEM and we worked on some different projects.
There were good times and bad times.
Good times and bad times.
Steve, my first photography show when I had my dark room and all that was at McCormick's Creek. And it was me and Richard Fields and Daryl Jones. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven and hit the big time because I was like, my photos were with their photos, and that was like right when I graduated from fine arts school, with photography. But yeah, you're
when
right.
I did at IDEM, I wrote more than I did photography. I published a newspaper for them for 4 years. Actually, John Hamilton, the first 2 years, the mayor of Bloomington, I worked 50 feet from John's desk and worked with John for the first 2 years. But I remember when I met Rich, I remember telling him, "You got the greatest job in the state of Indiana." And he said, "I know."
Thanks for the reminder,
You got to go out and photograph Indiana nature. I had to write about the pollution, the toxic chemicals, and all that sort of thing. So I was very envious of Rich. He's been one of my photo heroes for certain.
Well, it's true, and I'm doing photography on my own these days, and that's fine also.
Yeah, I am curious, because you did do so much about environmental cleanups that needed to happen or trying to stop environmental degradation like highways and things like that. And then this is like such a nice guide, it's kind of a transition. And I wondered, was that kind of like out of necessity after all those years of working so hard towards trying to make things better? Now this guide is just like such a great look at all the cool things we have.
Right.
We want to preserve them, and look who is preserving them.
Right. Well, interestingly, the nature photography came first. I started shooting nature photography when I was in college. My junior year, I got my first camera, and I started photographing nature early on. And after we had children, and my ex-wife and I had children, the decision was, okay, I'm not going to be able to make my living what am I going to do? And I decided to get a master's degree in journalism, with photojournalism being the focus. And so I went to the journalism school, and in my first writing class, midterm, the first professor said, well, you could do this for a living, don't you? And I had no idea that I had the writing knack. My hope was that I could develop the writing to go along with the photography. So at that point, certainly in journalism, there was more opportunities for writers than there were photographers. So that's when I got into writing. When I was in two of the primary issues that I wrote about that I know you all will remember was the Hoosier National Forest clear cutting plan in 1985 and the PCB incinerator in Bloomington. When I was in graduate school, they proposed the PCB incinerator. So I started writing about the incinerator when I was in graduate school. And my final master's project was titled Clear Cutting the Hoosier National Forest, Professional Forestry or Panacea. So those were the two issues that I first got involved in terms of writing about. And right out of graduate school, I got a job as a reporter at the HT. And in those days, reporters wrote stories, editors edited stories in the paper, and photographers took pictures. And you really didn't mix and match. In 11 years at the HT, I had 2 photographs published in 11 years. So I pretty much became a writer. but I covered the PCB incinerator through its demise, fortunately.
Can I interject something there? Because
Sure.
one of the book clubs that we did on the Juniper Art Gallery book club or YouTube channel was with Charlotte Zelo, and it was awesome. She was so amazing, and she really, really goes on and on about how Steve helped. I mean, basically stopped that incinerator. So if you got time to watch that, I thought that was a really fun interview.
Yeah, Charlotte and I did a lot of damage. Charlotte and I.
I know her.
She's a force of nature.
And that incinerator was proposed. It was supported by the city of Bloomington. It was supported by IBM. It was supported by EPA. It was supported by Westinghouse. They had these high-powered lawyers and consultants out of Chicago who were all about this is going to save the world, right? And Charlotte Zitlow was the only person in Bloomington in an official capacity who understood what was really going on and opposed to the incinerator. And I covered county government, fortunately. So Charlotte and I would say Charlotte and I stopped that incinerator. Everybody who was involved in it, we can take all the credit, but I don't think it would have happened without Charlotte. In fact, I know, especially without Charlotte, it would not have happened. I couldn't have stopped it just writing about it. But she was able to.
Steve, I'm curious about grad school at IU. Did you work with Dr. Counts very much?
Yes, actually, Will Counts, I knew Will very early on. In fact, you'll appreciate this. Years after I was out of school and I was a PhD, my daughter Crystal was getting into photography in high school. We went to Roberts in downtown Bloomington on Kirkwood, and Will Counts was there. And so Will and I got to talking, and I told him what I was doing, And I said, I'm going to get an enlarger for my daughter Crystal. And he goes, well, he said, Steve, I'll tell you what. He says, I've got an old Vessel 23C with a color head in my basement. He said, I'm getting into digital photography.
I know exactly that enlarger.
He says, I want to get out of it. He says, I'm getting into digital. My wife wants me to get rid of this stuff. I said, well, how much would you sell it for? And at first he said $100, and I said, sold. And then the more we got to talking, he said, well, you know what, Steve, let's just consider this a permanent loan. He gave me that Vessel 23C, which is still in the attic of my house. I have it recently, many, many years. And Will and I and John Allhauser, we were in the photography department. So even though I kind of drifted into reporting, I still took classes with those guys and got to know Will and John really well.
Well, I probably would have been very familiar with you had I stayed in grad school. I entered grad school in photography in 84-ish.
Okay.
The job opened up at DNR in 85. What do you do? It was pretty quick.
That's actually when I finished. I finished up because I started at the PhD in 85, so I finished my graduate work, except for the final project in probably about 84. So we just missed each other.
We had similar paths later on, so that's great.
People often ask me, what would you consider the highlights of your career? Certainly, and two of them involved me and Charlotte. The first was killing that incinerator. The second was when a doctor at Bloomington Hospital, Dr. Kelly, contacted me and said, there are some doctors here who are trying to take over Bloomington Hospital and turn it into a for-profit hospital. Tony Pizza told her, if you're concerned, call Steve Higgs at DHT. So Dr. Kelly called me. I started covering that. It was towards the end of my time. And I sort of drew Charlotte into that. It wasn't really Charlotte's issue, but Charlotte was opposed to it because you know what Charlotte is like. And so I kind of knew Charlotte a little bit. She was sort of my validation of standing up at the hospital. And in the end, we killed that deal. It's still a nonprofit hospital up to this point in time, quote unquote. If you follow IU Health, this and that. We talk about IU Health, we could go off on a whole other place.
Yeah, Sharon would know.
I don't know if you've heard this, but they've come under a lot of pressure from industry because the rates are so high. And they actually commissioned the RAND Corporation to do a study and found that IU Hospital is 30% more expensive than any other health system in the state of Indiana, and their outcomes are just average. Not above average in any way. And just in the past few months, they got caught. The Indiana Business Journal looked into it, and they actually turned $1 billion profit last year. But to hide the fact that they made so much money, they gave a $400 million gift to the IU Med Center up in Indianapolis on the books, but not saying exactly what had happened until they found out. So, like I said, we can talk about that forever. But Charlotte and I stopped that. And then the third one was the Hoosier National Forest Program. After I wrote my final master's project, I covered that through the entire time of PhD. And by 1992, it was proposed in '85, and by 1992, it had been scrapped, and they replaced it with the most ecologically sensitive forest management plan in the United States at the time. And so those are the three, two of which, of course, were environmental. Those are probably the three biggest accomplishments in my career. The biggest failure was I-69.
Oh, yes.
We fought that, and I was involved
I
in
have a
that.
question about that. How
Sure.
about that middle corridor they're talking about? I mean, did they decide on the final route? Because I hadn't been following too close. But
Not yet.
they mentioned Lost River and all that, and I told my friend, I said, they did that because they already have a route picked out, and they're giving you other choices, so you get real riled up about, oh, no, not Lost River or this one, but you can take those others. So people, when they actually choose a route, it's like whatever you call that, bait and switch or whatever. It's like, and I got really angry because I could see through that. I thought, they don't need to build another highway. Why do they have to tear up these little towns? They got them every which way already, so don't get me started either. Because, every time I read something about that, it just burns me up. I thought, okay, you're not even done with 69 and you've got money burning a hole in your pocket and you just have to, who's going to upkeep these roads? And how about these small towns? So sorry, go back to what you're doing. I should have came here today.
No, we're
And
glad
I
to
know
do
you were
it.
talking about that stuff. I was like, oh no.
Like I said, I'm not prepared, so we can go off on any.
Okay, that's all right. I'm done with that tangent.
But they actually proposed that initially back during the I-69.
I know.
The Midstate Corridor was a part, sort of a corollary to the whole I-69. So it has taken them a long time to get around to it. It's like everything else, they're going to do it come hell or high water.
Yeah, but people are burned out on this stuff, I mean, really, I think the state, people in the state should be burned out on all the
Right.
construction and money being spent and everything.
But public opinion doesn't matter.
And all
Public doesn't matter.
on all the natural areas that are getting tore up, that eminent domain thing, I don't know who ever started that. But it was just, anyway, I'm a kind of a naturalist myself, that's why I like your work. I mean, I didn't know about the other stuff because, I got into all that hiking a little bit later in life, as far as all those issues. But it's interesting to hear you speak about it because I do remember the incinerator. I'm old enough to remember all that, and I probably read your stories.
If you read the HT, you did.
I did.
There was that PCB billboard
Yes.
between Bloomington and Nashville,
Right?
and were you part of that too?
No, I was just reporting on it.
Well, it was striking. You never see, biochemistry on a billboard.
Right.
So Steve, here's a tough question. What's your favorite nature reserve?
Yeah.
Or top three?
You knew that was coming.
I know it's coming. And it's an easy answer. The Hoosier National Forest is by far my favorite. A lot of the stuff in that book is from research that I did back in 1975. When NPER got involved in the fight over the Charles D. Wolf facility. That's actually my first active involvement. Many of you guys probably know Jeff Stamp, out of the Indiana Forest Alliance today. Well, it was about 1980. It was just before I went to graduate school. We were living in a roach-infested public housing apartment on the west side of Indianapolis. My wife at the time said, you need to get out of the apartment. You need to go to a Sierra Club meeting or something. So I went to a meeting of the Uplands Group Sierra Club at the Monroe County Public Library downtown, and here was this guy up on stage, Jeff Stamp. And those of you who know Jeff, you know the gaze that I'm talking about. He scans the room and he stops at every single person's eyes and focuses on them as he's talking. And he sort of focused on me and sort of drew me in. The next thing I knew, I was the newsletter editor for the Uplands Group Sierra Club, my first environmental journalism. Although I'll be honest, Jeff thinks we put out a newsletter. We actually didn't. We never put one out, but I had the title. I mean, we worked on one, but then the dean got upset. I mean, they came up with a compromise. It had been this long, drawn-out, really hard-fought battle. There was two guys, Peck, what was his name? Well, anyway, there was one particular thing. There was a guy from Brown County, Peck Forgy, I think was his name, and there was one meeting where Jeff and Peck were going at each other, and Jeff finally said, well, I'm going to outlive you. That was the final thing. But they reached that compromise. established the Charleston Wilderness Area, and I actually drove Senator Richard Lugar's environmental assistant to the Dean Wilderness dedication. Jeff Stamp drew me into it in the early 1980s. And I also remember telling Jeff I decided to go to graduate school, go into journalism. And he said, well, what are you going to do there? And I said, write about the environment. So that was over 40 years ago. And, you know, not many things that you say you're going to do actually turns out to be something that you do for 40 years. But it did, you know, I'm still, to a certain extent, writing about it here today. But, you know, I wrote about a lot of things, the law, health, politics, and the environment were the four things that I really specialized in, and environment was always the overriding one. And so back to Jamie's question, you know, from graduate school through the career, when the way these books came about was I always taught. I wanted the freedom to do journalism the way I wanted to do it. In addition to the things that are in the book, I published the Bloomington Alternative for 10 years. And, excuse me, I'm losing my train of thought. So I was getting a little tired of the journalism field, and I was teaching at IU because I taught for 27 years, since 1987. I've taught there, and that's how I paid my bills. So at a midterm, I think it was in 2013, at a midterm conference, I had a darling little Chinese student who, she and I got to talking. She was my very last midterm conference for the semester. And she got to talking, and we ended up talking for like an extra half an hour, the two of us. And she talked about how her favorite thing to do growing up in China was going with her photographer grandpa to the mountains, and going with him while he was taking pictures. So going back to the PCB thing, so there was a guy here in town named John Canada who led like a PCB tour at one time. He would take people around to all the various Superfund sites and tell them stories about it and whatnot. And I'd always kind of had in the back of my mind doing some sort of a tour business kind of thing. And I remember asking a friend, Nell Weatherwax, and you guys know Weatherwax, George Murphy. I remember asking George, you know, what do you think about this idea if I led these tours? We would go to PCB incinerator, we would go to all the PCB sites, toxic waste, as well as the natural areas. And so I think people would be interested in the natural areas. They wouldn't want to go see toxic waste sites. And I said, okay. So that had always been in the back of my mind. And so this girl, her name was Jingy Jane Jang. And, you know, I said, you know, after she said that to me, I got to thinking, well, you know, maybe it's time to start something different. So I started Natural Bloomington's Eco-Tours and more. She and two of her friends were the very first eco tour that I led. I took them out to the Hoosier and several places. And as I got started doing that, some maybe probably know Linda O'Black. Linda O'Black was a sponsoring editor at Higg Press at the time. And as I started doing this, and I don't know if I was on Facebook at that time, but somehow Linda got hooked into it, and she contacted me. She said, well, if you're going to be doing this anyway, she said, I've been doing a series of guidebooks. She'd done the one on the Karst. She'd done one on the Knobston Trail. She said, if you're going to be doing this anyway, why don't we think about doing a book? And I didn't hesitate. I just said, sure, you know, I'm going to do it. So as I actually read through this the other day, and by the time she and I actually sat down to sign the contract, I'd already written 40,000 words of the book, because that's how this book came about. And so I kind of backed off a little bit on the eco tours and really started focusing on this. The Area 10, that and another eco tour that I led, a friend of mine who's actually been my tech consultant since the late 1990s, is blind. And he got in touch with me once, and I led an eco tour with the American Council of the Blind. We had took about 15 people who were blind we went to Leonard Springs Nature Park. We went out to Latimer Woods. It was another one. We went to 3 that day. And that was, and we also went up to Bee Blossom Bottoms. We went up to Bee Blossom Bottoms. Carol Kugler from the HT joined us up at Bee Blossom Bottoms, and then did a story about the eco tour with the American Council of the Blind. And the most interesting thing for me, it was fascinating on every angle. But I thought, you know, we'll go to places where there's lots of sound and smells and that sort of thing. And when we were at Leonard Springs, I remember one of the women saying, well, what I really want to know, I want you to describe what you see, because I can hear and I can smell, but I can't see. So please describe for us what we're seeing out there. Which was an eye-opener for me, because I was thinking probably the opposite of that would be the best thing that we can do. So that's how I got into the books. The first one, Southern Indiana, was just a natural. I mean, probably a quarter of what's in here is within 15 minutes of downtown Bloomington, because obviously there's more preserved there than it says. So we did this book. And then Linda left. This was actually the very last project that Linda O'Black did at IU Press. And then her successor came in. And there was also a new director, and they were anxious to get book contracts now. So he got in touch with me, and he said, well, the Northern Indiana book is a no-brainer. Let's do that. And he had another idea for a book that he wanted to do on rewilding Indiana, which is a kind of a thing around the country, although it's not saying anything that's kind of practical. And so I got to thinking about it. I said, well, from working on these books, especially with Mike Kamoya, up at the DNR, the Division of Nature Preserves, he's sort of Charles C. Dean, I think, of our generation. I don't know if you would agree with that, Rich.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, yes.
Well, I talked to him a lot because at DNR, they read every word in this book. They read every word in the Northern Indiana book. We had a really good relationship because we shared the same thing. I mean, we were both wanting to protect and not expose. And one of the things that had kept me from doing this kind of thing for many, many years was not wanting to bring more and more people into nature. It was sort of the love it to death kind of thing. But yeah, so I talked to Mike, and he was like, well, we've really protected pretty much all there is. We can expand some places. There's a few places here and there, and certainly with Sycamore Land Trust and all the land trusts between them and the Division of Nature Preserves, most of what is real natural Indiana has already, that's still there, that's native, it has pretty much been protected. So I said to Alan, the new editor that I had, I said, well, there's really not going to be much more of a chance to rewild anymore in Indiana, but it's already been done in the Hoosier National Forest. The Hoosier National Forest, of course, all of southern Indiana, when the white settlers got here, was all wilderness, right? Well, by the 1930s, the entire hill country of southern Indiana, everything that's in the Hoosier National Forest, everything that's in any of the state parks, had all been completely decimated. Overlogging, overconsumption, had just been completely wiped out. And in the early 20th century, the counties were left with all of this completely denuded land that was eroding, disappearing, and the conservation movement, which was really getting going at that time, stepped in and reclaimed all of this land. So I said, we've had this area, the Hoosier National Forest, that's already been rewilded to an extent that no other part of Indiana is ever going to return back to nature. So let's do a book on that. So I got a contract from IU Press to do another book called Rewilding Southern Indiana, the Hoosier National Forest, in which I traced and I turned it into them. And it's always been my dream to do a full-size coffee table colored book. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the name Bill Thomas. Bill Thomas was 1976 National Geographic Nature Photographer of the Year. I was selling cameras at Kazel's Camera Center downtown in 1978 when Bill Thomas comes in with some flyers for a
You say Hazel's?
Hazel's Camera Center. Remember Hazel's?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I worked there from 78 to 80. And Bill was, like I say, he was a 1976 National Geographic Nature Photographer of the Year. He and I became friends. We took his very first photo seminar out at Brown County out there. He was very encouraging of my work. And so it had always been my dream. He'd written these a couple of books. One was called The River, American Rivers. Another one was called The Swamp. I think there was a third one, and that had always been my dream. So here I have this chance to do this book on Hoosier National Forest.
One thing about Bill, he had a house split. He had a bunch of them. He didn't have a light meter. I mean, he just knew.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He was that kind of photographer.
Wow.
And he ended up going on to leading nature photo tours all over the world. He's deceased now. He died a few years ago. So that was my dream, was to produce this book on the Hoosier National Forest. I mean, I finished the book. It traces the history going back, the 300 million years ago. And this land that we're on today was located on the equator, right, when it was a shallow inland sea. The limestone here was formed by decaying critters that their shells would settle to the bottom. That's how the limestone formed. So in words and pictures, I traced the entire history from 300 million years ago. Actually, before that, the natural history of it goes back billions of years to the formation of the rocks in this area. And I submitted it to IU Press. And I wasn't surprised when they came to me and said, well, we're sorry, we can't really afford to publish this book. The reason I wasn't surprised was because they gave me an advance to do this book, which is very, very expensive, right? Well, a friend of mine had proposed to them to do a book on the magnificent trees of Indiana. And they asked him to raise $20,000 in order to do the book. They settled for $5,000. That fell apart, although the book had been published by someone else. I won't get into that part of the story. So I wasn't surprised when they said, we can't really afford to publish this book. They wanted to do it in black and white. They still wanted to do the book, but they wanted to do it in black and white. Well, that wasn't a 40-year dream of mine to produce a black and white book in the days of digital photography. So I passed on that. There was another problem with it, was because it was kind of unfinished. The very last chapter started when Mike Chavez, the new current Hoosier National Forest Supervisor, took over, and so the last chapter was called the Chavez Years. Well, if you guys have heard about Houston South, it was down on Lake Monroe. They were proposing this logging and burning in the Lake Monroe watershed. The Monroe County Environmental Commission sued, and so it was kind of a book without an ending, right? And it was getting a little personal. I mean, my last draft was a little personal because I was really upset with Mike. So I was also kind of okay with not publishing it just because it didn't have an ending, and I didn't like the ending. And I told IU Press, I'm going to want to redo the last chapter. I'm giving it to you now. And then I'm going to want to redo the last chapter so I can kind of get it under control. And then the pandemic hit, and Houston South stopped, and so everything just kind of came to a standstill until now. I'm sure you all know Andy Mahler, Heartwood, Protect Our Woods early on. Well, the Hoosier National Forest now is back to, they've got a big plan down in Springs Valley, down in Orange County, down by Andy's property, where they're going to be logging, they're going to be spraying, they're going to be burning. So Andy has come back from the dead. He was retired for many, many years. I led a couple of Sierra Club hikes where we ended up going down and hanging out with Andy down there. But he just got in touch with me recently. He's been reinvigorated. He's sort of come out of retirement. He's back involved, so I'm kind of hoping that there's going to be a final chapter written in that book. And my last editor at IU Press, who I think was pretty supportive, is now the director of the University of Kentucky Press. So I've still got in the back of my mind, if Andy gets the final chapter for me to write, I will get in touch with Ashley down in Lexington and see if perhaps, I still might be able to fulfill this life dream. I mean, I produced it, but it never got produced. So it's there, it's on my computer. But it's no point saying this. Okay, I ran.
Sounds like happening.
No,
Yeah.
You've kind of come up to this point, but I'm curious about what you think about some of the current events that are going on. I've done some volunteer with Friends of Lake Monroe with their water sampling, and I know about the Houston South. Is that the one?
It's called Houston. It's pronounced Houston. So
Yeah, and then down, I've heard about the one down by Andy Mahler's also, but just that approach that the Forest Service has taken in terms of management. I'm curious what you think about some of the current things that are going on too.
sure. Well, when Mike got here, Chavez got here, I think it was in 2014, 2015, around there. When he was brand new, I went down there with a video camera and an intern and sat down and interviewed him, when he was fresh and new. And he insisted, we're not going to clear cutting, we're not going to be doing any of that. We're not going to be cutting trees for money. We're going to be, what logging we're going to be doing is for natural enhancement. We're going to cut down all the old pine trees, which, on one hand, I understand that, but they are a part of the ecosystem. Even though they weren't native to the area, I think they should probably be left alone. I mean, I think the whole region should be left alone, honestly. I think it should all be a giant nature preserve. So, I have him on video, it's on YouTube, I have the whole talking points about it. Well, there's two things that's happening. Number one, and Andy can talk a lot more about this than I can because I'm not in on the details anymore. But he says that it's all budget driven. The budget is now for burning and all these treatments and herbicide spraying and all that, and that's the real reason I'm doing it. It's less for enhancement than it is to bring back, back. But the fundamental problem, and I've known this from the beginning, is that the forest management plan, which has only been updated once or twice since 1992, it's long overdue. Basically, that management plan says that old trees are bad. Old trees are unhealthy. That is their justification for cutting down all the now old growth, there's nothing except for the pioneer mothers, just more than about 100, late 1930s, a little over 100 years, not even 100 years old. But that is the underlying problem with what they're doing today is that their management plan says that there needs to be equal amounts of different age brackets in the tree for there to be a healthy forest. We need to have these different levels.
How
So
much
they-
logging took place? How much logging took place out of that,
Out of what?
of the decimation of the forest?
Well, the entire forest was decimated in the
Yeah.
1930s. There was a time when they went like 10 or 15 years without cutting a single stick of timber in the entire Hoosier National Forest back in the 80s and 90s when this new plan was put in place. So they have been increasing it. I documented that in my book. I don't have the numbers on the top
In
of my
terms
head.
of logging, they've been increasing the
They've
logging.
been increasing the timber harvest, and again, most of it has been the pine trees, but now they're to the point where they say that the forest is unhealthy because it has too many old trees. Okay?
But the forest.
So, yeah,
I just know that there are different qualities of forest with different ages. And what you have in a really old growth forest is it's a different environment than what you have with young growth. I mean, they're not the same. And the old growth has some qualities that you cannot get with the younger trees.
Right, and in terms of biodiversity, in the state of Indiana, that is what is lacking.
Yeah,
And then, we have trees of all different ages all over the state of Indiana, but the one thing we don't have is much old.
you should drive down the highway and look at the forest that you can see from the roads. There's almost nothing that's more than what I think of as a juvenile forest. You know what I mean? Where there's trees that are maybe about this big around at the backs, and everything else is new. So it's just good.
Well, and now we've got Owen Putnam Forest, some issues up there that you're probably familiar with.
oh,
But, in addition to doing unnecessary cutting of big trees, the road back to the cutting area is
Right.
2.5 miles long or so. And it's just a dirt road, one lane, goes through a couple pretty little creeks and it's all going to be devastated. And then, perpetually after that, because, the erosion and sedimentation and destruction of some outstanding natural areas there, walking fern and, really cool plants. But it's a shame.
It is. And the DNR is obviously much worse than the Hoosier National Forest. The Hoosier was just sort of getting back into this thing, whereas DNR for years and years and years. I mean, that's why Jeff Stan created the Indiana Forest Alliance, was to fight that. I mean, in 1980 when they created the backcountry area up on
Yellowwood, possibly.
Yellow
Yeah,
Road.
yeah, up
Look
in
what they did
Yellowwood.
to that. It's just
Morgan
horrible.
Monroe up there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's horrible what they've done out there. I hike out there a lot, so
Yeah.
I hike a lot. It makes me sick.
Yeah, they're logging, and that was created as the state's Charles D. Wilderness. Robert Orr, Republican governor in the early 1980s, signed that bill saying here's going to be a place where Hoosiers can go to enjoy solitude and the state of nature as it existed before the settlement. And they've logged in the backcountry area. You can't walk on a single trail in Morgan Monroe that doesn't walk.
Doesn't
across
have a
the
walk around, they have to keep making these walk arounds, on the Tecumseh and,
Exactly. And that's all about
I
it.
saw it, when I first saw it after they did it, I saw all the signs, I wasn't involved in that fight at all, but, you just gotta pick your battles. And I live over here and I'm just, but when I saw it, I was just sick to my stomach after I saw some of what they cut down. And it was really close to the lake trail, around the lake, some of it. I was like, wow, that's not backcountry at all. That's right here by the lake. So I was pretty upset. But, I don't know how you stop it. I don't know how you stop them.
But that's all about money. That's all,
I don't think
were
you
you
can.
were you at the state when Mitch
I don't think
Daniels
that's
became governor?
nothing about it.
Were you at DNR when Mitch Daniels became governor?
Oh, my gosh, yes.
I mean, that's when he set out the directive, every department in the state of Indiana has to be run like a business. It's all about bringing in revenue, and that's what got DNR started on
Yeah.
the logging.
There was a Black Friday when a bunch of directors went away. New people were brought in, including around the same time, maybe exactly at that time, but the current director of forestry. in Indiana.
Super.
Super,
He's still, just there then.
Yeah, so, I've been looking into what's going on doing, but I think it's one of these state forests that's under the radar. People don't have the awareness that something bad is going to happen. Fortunately, Owen County now has the Friends of Owen Putnam, but I should be careful what I say
Right.
Well, it's being
about some of these things, But yeah, it's horrible. It was unnecessary. Bonnie Fisher, was the director of forestry before Steve came in, and recognized over and over again as one of the most outstanding and well balanced forestry directors nationwide. And we went from that to the polar opposite, in my opinion.
My opinion too. I would agree with you. Because I was really involved when Mitch Daniels, of course, mostly over I-69, but also over the forest issues.
Right.
I mean, it was a sea change, all of a sudden. It
Yeah.
was, commodity driven and any sort of natural characteristics, any importance on that stuff was just irrelevant. It was an obstacle to be overcome. And that's what most of these plans are. As long as they go through the steps, they can end up doing whatever they want. All you can really challenge them on
Yeah.
is the process.
Open to new state forests and plant 1 million trees, and then you can do whatever you want. Sorry, I'm talking about the current governor. I saw his trees up there up by Farragut, New York, Monroe, that, I can't think of the name. I went up there at night and all those trees, and a lot of them died because after they planted them, they didn't get water, it's hot. I was thinking, they do that, for every good thing that's trying to happen, something bad's trying to stop it, and, that's every bad thing, there's good people. It's what are you gonna do, Well, if we do this, then we won't get in trouble for doing that. People won't even, oh, look, they, 2 new state forests, one in Brown County, one up in Morgan County. Sorry, I'm not voting. I talk to whoever will listen, and there's not very many people over here that listen. I need to get on.
When I see people planting trees,
I know I am, or I wouldn't be talking broadly.
I really think so much of the time, if you just left it alone for 10 or 15 years, you'd end up with as many or more trees,
I know.
or go out and throw some
You
acorns
wouldn't cut them all,
around,
because
It's like,
they left all those treetops in Yellowwood so that the undergrowth could come up, and it looks horrible, I'm like, I'd like to take pictures of that and put in an article, But they've already done it.
So a couple of things along those lines. My oldest daughter lives in New York, and I went to visit her a few years ago, and we went camping in the Adirondacks. In the 1890s, the state of New York declared the Adirondacks and the Catskills, for the most part, forever wild, right? No trees have been harvested, no management has been practiced on the vast majority of the Catskills and the Adirondacks. And I would challenge anybody to find any study, any place, that talks about an unhealthy forest in either one of those areas.
Very interesting.
The forest can take care of itself, right?
It always has.
It doesn't need our help. Of course, that's the difference between New York and Indiana. Indiana is the resources are there for us to use for humankind's benefit, right? And so we're going to do that. I don't know if you guys have ever been told this, but I've been told many times that we got the dean, the loggers get everything else.
Yeah,
You know?
that's kind of the way it is.
Yeah, well, we live on 300 acres of property that we co-own with 15 families. And we have had many, many, many discussions on how to manage the forest. And we were really fortunate in having Eleanor Olstrom's group of people come from IFRI. They were like a group of 30 people that were international, and she put it all together and studied different communities and also studied their land. And so they would come onto our property and they would look at how old our forest was, what the undergrowth was, what would happen if we didn't do anything, help to guide us a little bit about marking certain trees to promote, the larger trees and maybe cut out some of the smaller things and, that kind of land management, and most of the people that live there are of the ilk that any cutting of any tree is hard. So, we're not loggers by any, but we certainly went through a faction of people thinking, well, there could be some economics and maybe we could do it. So we had long discussions about it, but nonetheless, we have not. And so it's really interesting to hear what yours, the most untouched turned out to be the healthiest in terms of a forest. We're working on it. We've been there 47 years.
I'm gonna interject something. I just think that the whole thing about cutting forests in Indiana or anywhere is, it's not necessarily because they need to, but just because they can.
Well,
Once they learn they can't do it.
timber is high end.
I mean, I know,
Monster.
and I do know that the forest has a budget and like so much a percentage comes, that the sale of the timber goes to that forest, but not very much of it. I don't know how much the percentage is, but I read it. Most of it goes to the state here, and I don't know what they do with it, but
And the prices they get.
I don't know what they do with it.
And when they logged in Yellowwood, they did a study about how much money they actually received and what the timber
wasn't much,
would have
was
been
it?
worth on the market and
Yeah,
blah, blah, and it turns out it
It
was
was
30%.
yeah.
A lot lower than what you would expect.
I know.
Steve,
Well-
I'm gonna kind of go off on a different tangent. I'd like to hear some stories about putting, finding the trails,
Yeah, me too.
things that happened along the way. I'm sure nothing exciting.
The only time that I got lost, this is in the Northern Indiana book, was up in the Lake Country up in Northern Indiana. And I got disoriented. I was like 300 feet from the trailhead, and I thought I'd gotten lost, even though I was just, like I say, 300 feet away from the thing. A couple of things that I really learned, two of the biggest surprises. I mean, I've always believed that the 88 acres at Pioneer Mothers down in Orange County is the largest old growth stand in the state of Indiana. It's not the most impressive. I think Donaldson's Woods, which is 60 acres, and what's the state park down there?
Spring Mountain.
Yeah. I think that's more impressive. But what I actually discovered was the largest stand of old growth timber, uncut timber in Indiana is inside the Evansville city limits, right at the end of the Erie Canal. You can stand on the edge of Wesselman Woods. I think it's about 250 acres. You can stand right on the edge, and right there is where the Erie Canal reached, but was never completed. So had the Erie Canal been completed, those trees would, of course, been cut and gone. But there's a couple hundred acres of untouched old growth forest inside the Evansville city limits. The other great discovery of mine that I found, living in Bloomington for all these years, I had no idea about Latimer Woods, which is right in the back of College Mall. The people who own the College Mall, there's a little creek that runs right along Buick Cadillac Drive there. Well, that was their back 40. And they never cut any trees back there. They went back there and collected berries and nuts and honey and that kind of stuff. So right in the middle of this between the College Mall and all that student housing down there, is this little tiny plot of old growth forest. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a former student who came to town and she talked to my class and I showed her around and we went out there. You know that one massive unbelievable tree there? It's looking really bad. I mean, the whole Latimer Woods is looking bad. There's lots of stuff that's down. If you look up to the top of that, there's a picture of it in here. The branches up at the top are like stubs, so I'm afraid that one is about. So that was one of those are my two greatest discoveries. As far as people always ask me, and back to Jamie asking what was my favorite, being I was raised in Indy, in the flatlands, and lived down here for since 1969, whatever the math is on that. But I think my favorite was the Northeast Indiana, the natural lakes up there, the Kettle Lakes up there in Steuben County. There's one in particular called the Three Sisters. Just amazing. Natural blue, shimmering blue lakes, places that were formed when the glaciers receded and they left these called kettles, right? Once the water disappeared, there were depression areas there that turned into these lakes. Those were incredible. Some of my favorite. And I'm a little partial to that. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Tom and Jane Dustin. Tom Dustin he's sort of the godfather of Indiana environmental. He was with the Isaac Walton League up in, he lived in Huntertown, which is just north of Fort Wayne. It's where Acres Land Trust is. That's where their headquarters is now. When Tom and Jane died, they willed their property to Acres, which is the second oldest. The Nature Conservancy was formed, I think, a year or two before that was. But some of the greatest natural areas that are still preserved in Indiana are up around Fort Wayne, thanks to Tom and Jane Dustin and Acres, the Acres Land Trust up there, and the Isaac Walton League, which are a group of hunters. You know, hunters, of course, have always been in the forefront of preservation because preserving the land supports the game for them. So that certainly the Kettle Lakes up there are some of my favorites. I talk in the Northern Indiana book, my very last drive. Out of 5 years of finishing this entire thing, my last drive was driving literally across I-80. There's a place up in Gibson called, I think it's the Gibson Preserve. There's a nature preserve up in northwest Indiana. And there's another one called Crestmore. That was the last one I went to, which is a little prairie stand up there in Griffith, Indiana. But I finished this journey with my last natural area, and I finished the journey driving at 5 o'clock on Interstate 80 traffic, headed east towards the dunes where I was camping. So we kind of started here in Bloomington and ended up on I-80. But there's really some amazing places up in Northwest. Of course, the Indiana Dunes.
Mm-hmm.
When I wrote the Northern Indiana book, I mentioned in there that it was about to become a national park. At that time, it was still a national lakeshore. And of course, it's incredible. You know, it's the Indiana Dunes National. Well, let me tell you, this is a story that hardly anybody knows about. And this is actually from my first book, Eternal Vigilance, back in the 1990s. There was a deal when John Kennedy was alive. There had been this big battle over the dunes. Indiana, Democrats, Republicans, everybody wanted to turn the entire lakeshore into Gary, right? It was going to be industrialized all the way to Michigan City. The only people who were in favor of saving the dunes were in Chicago. You've heard of the Paul Douglas Environmental Education Center there. Paul Douglas was a Republican senator from Illinois who was the stalwart defender of the Indiana Dunes. The Indiana Dunes is the birthplace of the study of ecology. William Coles Bog is named after a University of Chicago professor who used to take students over to study the dunes, and that's considered the birth of the modern ecology. Well, there was a newspaper reporter who was in John Kennedy's office, and he read a document upside down on Kennedy's desk that said the Indiana Dunes deal had been signed, sealed, and delivered. All it was waiting for was John Kennedy to sign it, and the entire Indiana Dunes lakeshore would have been developed. Well, this reporter left Kennedy's office, went and called Paul Douglas. Paul Douglas called John Kennedy, went to the White House. They took what was known as the Rose Garden Walk. Kennedy and Douglas walked through the Rose Garden. Kennedy said, "You can come up with a compromise." He said, "I will sign." So Paul Douglas called Herb Reed, who was one of the founders of the Save the Dunes Council up there. He called Herb Reed. He said, "Well, you guys need to come to Washington and give us your plan on on why we shouldn't develop it according to this plan." He said, "What's your reason?" And Herb said, "I don't know, but we'll have it for you when we get there." So Herb and another guy got on a train and spent the whole ride they lived in Chesterton, Indiana, all the way from Chesterton to Washington, D.C., and they were perusing the documents all the way there and realized, and this is a common thing that we know about today, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers were double counting benefits. They would say, this is going to benefit us here, the same thing is going to benefit us in different places, which was not basically, it was cooking the books, right? So by the time they got to Washington, D.C., they had identified all this double counting that the Corps of Engineers had done. When they got there, they gave that to Paul Douglas. Paul Douglas gave it to John Kennedy. And now what is reputed to have the greatest biodiversity in the northern hemisphere is saved and is now a national park and is forever protected up there. But had that reporter, journalist, had he not read that document and called Paul Douglas, we would have steel and oil plants all the way from Michigan City.
And he read it upside down.
He read it upside down. It was on Kennedy's desk. He was like,
I like doing that. not gonna do it.
Doesn't talk too much.
No, you haven't talked too much at all. I really, this has been really, fun to listen to these stories. I just want to back to the guidebook itself, the guidebooks. Unfortunately, I'm out of the Northern Indiana guidebook. It's on back orders, so I'm not sure what's going on with that either, Steve. So we're like, why can't I get the Northern Indiana guidebook? But hopefully I will get it back in soon. But I just, want to say that customers come in all the time, they pick this book up and they come back and they tell me it's the best guidebook they've ever seen or read and how much they love it. So if you don't have a copy,
I learned a lot reading mine. I brought mine with me.
it's so good. And if you haven't picked it up in a while, read Jim Thom's foreword. It's like it was so fun. I reread that last night. It's so fun. But anyway, it is a great guidebook, and if you brought your own, Steve will be happy to sign it for you. And I have some for sale too. You can purchase up at the counter if you want to buy and have it signed as well. So thank you so much for coming, Steve.
Well, thank you for having me.
I enjoy it so much, and we're all welcome to stick around, drink some coffee.
Thumbs
Please.
up on the coffee.
Do you like?
I have one more story to tell you when we go off camera.
Oh, okay. I will. Okay.